Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where we talk about the Constitution, politics, history, and pretty much anything else I want to talk about. This podcast can be found on iTunes, or I should say Apple Podcasts. I don't know why I can't remember that. Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, a few other places. Anyway, you can find it. Also, it's on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in Annette Talks, you can see what I look like and what my guests look like. Today, I'm on by myself. I tried to get on the author of this book, Faucian Bargain, Steve Dace, but he did not respond, so I'm going to go ahead without him. Also, if you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. I'm getting close to 800 on there. Once I hit 800 subscribers, I'm going to hand out a free 72-hour kit as seen on this podcast. All right, so today I'm going to talk about this book, Faucian Bargain, by Steve Dace and Todd Erzin. I don't know who Todd Erzin is. I do know who Steve Dace is. And anyway, this book, it says all those things that you've been thinking for the last year and a half about the way COVID's been handled. And so if you haven't read it, I highly recommend you go pick it up. It's fun, it's funny, it's very factual. And the main thrust of it is that, you know what a Faustian bargain is, right? It's trading one thing for something much worse. And so in this case, we traded we gave up our sense of taking care of ourselves to this unelected bureaucrat, Fauci, and we've seen nothing but tyranny since then. And one of the things he says in this book, which I really agree with, is that one of Trump's biggest mistakes was not firing Fauci early on, or maybe not early on. I don't think we all knew how terrible he was until we started finding out how much he was lying and he's recommending these terrible lockdowns that don't work. Anyway, so but the main thrust of the first part of the book is that here we have an unelected bureaucrat who basically was given a lot of control over the economy and over our behavior, being able to recommend these lockdowns and masks and all these things. And we had no recourse against him. And he talks about how Fauci lied time and time again, kept flip-flopping on his positions. You know, first nobody should be wearing a mask. And then, I lied about that because I was afraid that the healthcare workers wouldn't get enough masks. So now you do need a mask. Oh, and you should get a double mask. And what's funny, I didn't know until I read this book, was the double mask thing came from a study that the CDC did on dummies, on mannequins. I don't know how, you don't learn anything, they don't breathe. So, well, what's also interesting is that I did an episode before the double mask thing came out, and I did it with the comedian Steve Solberg, and I made a joke that eventually, double mask, triple mask, quadruple mask, right? Because obviously that was a joke. And then Fauci decided that that was a real thing. So he says that we need a 9/11 style commission on Fauci, because why did he keep flip-flopping his positions? What did he base the lockdown recommendation on? There is lots and lots of unanswered questions, but that we need to hold Fauci's feet to the fire and hold him accountable for all the arbitrary decisions that he laid out on us. And on page 80 in the book, they're talking about why Trump didn't fire Fauci, and it says, we, the authors of this book, believe the main reason Trump was not reelected is he never made the decision he should have made, firing Fauci. Once it became clear Fauci was behind the curve, he was allegedly trying to flatten. Okay, let me find out. There was another part in here I wanted to read. It was clear that by the summer of 2020 that Fauci either didn't know what he was talking about, was making it up as he went along, was really bad at this, just wasn't capable of being intellectually honest, or was a willing/unwilling participant in an election year black op. At the very least, somewhere along the line, Fauci forgot we are not his patients, we are the people, and this is a government by and for the people, not by and for a swamp of unelected bureaucrats who last so long in government they become its highest paid employee. For most of the pandemic, the American people have been offered a false choice between either pretending this was just a bad flu so nothing should be done, or hiding out in your homes until the vaccines arrived. And at the time this book was being written, that false choice has morphed into the vaccines are here, but we still need lockdowns and double masks. But there is always a third way. And then they go on to talk about other options that we could have done. Um, and so it goes into how he kept changing his mind, and how there was never anything to support it, and how he was basically treated like a messiah by the media and by the left, and how what's his name in New York was his top priest or minister, Cuomo. And so and that Andrew Cuomo and Fauci grew up together. I didn't know that. I didn't know that they were buddies that grew up together. I thought that was pretty interesting. Another comment that he made at some point is that, as bad as Fauci was, he wasn't the real problem. The problem is that we have unelected bureaucrats that are unaccountable. And that if it hadn't been Fauci, it would have been someone else. So I wanted to go into detail on chapter 10, because he talks about how we have, well, I'm just gonna read it because I like the way he puts it. Chapter 10 is called The Branch Covidian Cult. Throughout human history, our species has typically been prone to ignore potentially cataclysmic events in favor of comfort and carrying on with our daily lives. However, for perhaps the first time, a segment of the American population is bound and determined to turn COVID-19 into the apocalyptic event it never was. That is not to say it is not in any way serious, for it most definitely is. COVID-19 is at least the worst pandemic to hit our nation since the Hong Kong flu in 1969, and maybe the worst since the Spanish flu of 1918, which means it ranks somewhere between a mid-century and a once-a-century event. The loss of life, as well as the loss of way of life, makes this the most existential threat the average American has faced in their daily lives since Pearl Harbor. And I agree with that. This last year and a half has been just an unimaginable nightmare. Like it's felt completely different than anything we've ever been through, than anything I've been through in my life. And that's in large part due to Fauci, and then due to this group of people, this percentage of the population that seems to want this. They seem to enjoy the fear. All right, back to the book. Yet for a boisterous block of Americans America that's not good or bad enough, they demand more or worse. Anything less than World War Z simply won't cut it. Almost as if they crave apocalypse, and don't you dare try to take it away from them with something like the facts. To these people, any attempt at accurate reporting of the true infection fatality rate or case fatality rate, or daring to reassert the natural laws of science as it pertains to immunity, or daring to balance the broader socioeconomic fallout of mitigation efforts such as lockdowns, is akin to hate speech, or you just hate old people. I 100% agree with this. Over the last year, I don't know how many times I was posting the charts with the data of the actual deaths. And every time I would have a few people that would come on there and say, oh, just wait 2 weeks, just wait 2 weeks and you'll see more deaths. Like they wanted to see more deaths, that they wanted this to be really much worse than it is. And I know it's bad, but I'm going to say it again. We are now 18 months into this. I still do not personally know someone who's died from it. I personally know someone who got very sick and was hospitalized and came close, but still not one person that's died. And I know a lot of people. Anyway, back to the book. For all intents and purposes, these Branch Covidians, as we call them, are perhaps the largest cult in American history. Every cult has a cult leader, and for these Branch Covidians, their high priest is none other than Anthony Fauci. Some of you may think describing these panic porn junkies as a cult is going too far, which is fair, so let's test that hypothesis. We believe there are 7 characteristics of a cult. Let's go through them one by one and see how many of these boxes are checked by today's Branch Covidians. Number 1, cults discourage, if not outright oppose, critical thinking. For crying out loud, must we even elaborate here on this very first one? The Branch Covidians not only refuse to consider any data that threatens their apocalyptic resolve, they seek to have others deplatformed and silenced for doing so. Yeah, I had a YouTube video with Dr. Barkey, who I'm going to record with again today, taken off of YouTube by YouTube because we dared to say that we don't all need to have the vaccine, and that Um, there are good treatments, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. Whoa, you can't say things like that. That goes against this narrative. Okay, only narratives that make COVID-19 out to be the love child of Ebola and smallpox are permitted through their Overton window. Any treatments slash remedies slash solutions that Donald Trump has ever spoken of fondly must immediately be discouraged or labeled as dangerous. And outside of when he's been forced to take questions from Senator Rand Paul a couple of times, you have rarely seen Fauci directly face any vetting of his views, regardless of how many times he contradicts himself. Check. Number two, cults isolate themselves and their members from the outside world, sometimes even forcibly. This one is a little too on the nose as well, eh? All those lockdown fetishes, which is forcible isolation by the force of law. All those whose mantra was, I'm never going out again until there's a vaccine. According to an Ohio State University poll, 72% of Americans still plan to wear masks in public even after COVID-19 is no longer a threat. I find that number really hard to believe. In other words, most Americans still plan on at least partially isolating from the outside world long after there's a virus. Over a 99% chance they'll either never get or survive if they do is long gone. While we are skeptical the actual number of Americans still masking will be anywhere near that high when the time comes, and most of these respondents are likely virtue signaling to a pollster, what if it's only half that? That's still 36%, which is still well over 100 million Americans. At the time we were writing this book, Fauci was out there telling Americans who had already been fully vaccinated they still needed to wear masks. Check. And I want to add that the vaccine passports, which are being used in New York and are threatened in many places, are just a higher form of virtue signaling. Look at me. I was so caring. I got the vaccine and I have something to prove it. Only a small problem with that, those people that don't need the vaccine, don't want the vote, or don't want the vaccine and don't get it, are all of a sudden the underclass. So you've just created a two-class system. And guess what? A huge majority of those people who are not taking the vaccine are Black or Hispanic. Now I can't wait to see the fallout from that, personally. I cannot wait come election time to see how minorities vote when they have to go to the polls and they remember that, especially in New York City, that they were kept out of restaurants and clubs and things because they didn't have the magical vaccine passport. Number three, cults claim to have special knowledge or that only the special can attain their knowledge. The term novel coronavirus was meant to mean a new strain or variation of a familiar virus. For example, the term coronavirus is from the Latin word corona, which means crown. And in the case of coronaviruses, they were given this name because of the crown-like spikes on their surfaces. But there are numerous types of coronaviruses, including the type that caused the common cold. And we've been studying / fighting them in human beings since the 1960s. The coronavirus that causes COVID-19 is considered novel because the effects and complications it causes, such as loss of sense of smell, can differ from other coronaviruses. It is novel based on its behavior, not its essence, which means the established / confirmed laws of virology, immunology, and biology remain intact, which explains why, with a couple of symptomatic exceptions, it reacts and infects similar to other respiratory viruses. In fact, a study from way back in May 2020 showed much of the population not yet infected with COVID-19 could already have what's called crossover immunity, or a type of residual T cell immunity because of past exposure to more common forms of coronaviruses. Okay, I want you to think about that for a minute. So there could be a big segment of the population that, because they've had colds in the past that were other coronaviruses, have cross immunity from COVID-19. I think that would explain why many of us, myself included, have never gotten the virus. As far as I know, I've never lost my sense of taste or smell. I tested twice for antibodies and they said they weren't there, even though I don't know those tests are that accurate. But why is it that for a year and a half I've been running around mostly unmasked, having parties, doing all these things, and yet have not caught the virus? I mean, it could be because I take vitamin D and I get outside, I take vitamin C and all other things. Or it could be maybe I have some immune response from a past coronavirus. We never hear anyone talking about this, do we? It's all about vaccines and masks. That's it. All right, and a later study showed T cell immunity, a cellular immunity that originates from T cells in your bone marrow and isn't measured by your typical antibody test for a past/recovered infection, can last up to 17 years after an infection from a coronavirus. How many Americans have likely been exposed to a coronavirus-driven common cold or other form of respiratory virus in the last 17 years? Chances are quite a few. And this could be one of several reasons why a Johns Hopkins expert surprised many by recently predicting in the Wall Street Journal, we'll have herd immunity by spring. Furthermore, a 2021 study from the National Institutes of Health found lasting immunity from a more conventional antibody perspective for those who have had recovered from COVID-19, including the very promising finding 95% of the people had at least 3 of the 5 immune system components that could recognize COVID-19 up to 8 months after infection. Let's pause here for a moment and ask a question. How many of you reading this book have ever heard any of this information? How many of your friends, family, or neighbors have? Because without this type of information, you're going to assume novel coronavirus means an entirely whole new breed of virus the world has never seen before. Therefore, we have no baseline of precedent to go on when it comes to assessing how dangerous it is or what to do about it. Throughout this pandemic, including up to the time this book was being written, Fauci and his ilk have abandoned numerous fundamentals of scientific precedent, including the crossover/T cell immunity science we just shared with you. Instead, Fauci and his knockoffs helped inspire this branch COVIDian cult by treating COVID-19 as if it were a blank slate. And of course, you only fill in the blanks with the worst of the worst possibilities. Check. And that's something else I want to mention again, is that one of the things that you're not seeing from anyone on the news media or from Fauci, nobody ever's talking about antibodies. You never hear about how you could have a natural immune response. Why are we not talking about that? That's magically no longer a thing. That this is this new novel coronavirus there's no immunity to it naturally. That to me says a whole lot right there. That if you can do something to force people to do what you want, which is mask or vaccinate, then you're going to do that. Why let people have something natural that's already inside of them? 4, cults put loyalty to their leader above all else. Google trust Fauci and you'll get over 10 million results. You'll get almost twice as many if you Google, I want to have sex with Anthony Fauci. Oh, that's creepy. Google in Fauci we trust t-shirt and almost 1.7 million results come up, including 27 ads selling these shirts of various varieties. Google has listings for in Fauci we trust, signs, socks, mugs, ornaments, bumper stickers, and of course masks. Etsy, a website that specializes in handmade or custom gifts, has numerous listings with the Trust Fauci theme that boasts thousands in sales apiece. Saturday Night Live canonized Fauci as a sex symbol. The Daily Show wondered if Fauci was the sexiest man alive. CNN even acknowledged the cult of Anthony Fauci, and in a very on-brand take by the former news network, completely justified it. Famous actress Julia Roberts awarded Fauci with a Courage Award, and while doing so told him, "You have been a beacon for us." Check. I also want to say, I remember early on, oh gosh, it had to have been March or April last year, 2020, when I said something about Fauci being a liar or something, and a relative, an elderly relative, commented, and she never comments on anything I do. I've never seen her say anything on Facebook. Comes on there and says, "He's only trying to save us." So I believe this. There are people that really do think that he's been trying to save us for the last year and a half, and so we should not question him at all. Number 5, cults seek to detach you from your families. Chances are you're related to someone who will not tolerate any views on the virus beyond that which is spewed forth from the Fauci's pie hole. Chances are we've all been estranged from someone in our family because of lockdowns. Fauci told us not to have Thanksgiving in 2020 and proudly announced his own children wouldn't be coming home for the holiday that year. Fauci also added later, "For the first time in more than 30 years, I'm not spending the Christmas holidays with my daughters." To be fair, Fauci did say it's very likely safe for vaccinated family members to hug. So he's not totally heartless. Check. Number 6, cults cross moral boundaries and at times encourage others to as well. While locking us down during 30 days to slow the spread and demanding we stay away from friends and family, Fauci said random sex hookups with strangers you met online were totally kosher, though. However, taking the Eucharist at Mass was not. We've already documented in this book how many times he's either been dishonest or disingenuous. Check. Number 7, cults separate you from the true church. A survey of Protestant churches by Lifeway Research in February 2021 found that even in nearly a year since the pandemic began, in-person worship was still in decline. In fact, 11% fewer Protestant churches met in person in January 2021 than did in September 2020. That same survey found only 2% of Protestant churches had higher attendance in January 2021 than did January 2020, and only 30% say their attendance is back to normal. That's sad. From the Catholic perspective, Dan Salucci of the Catholic Leadership Institute summed it up this way: the pandemic has led to an acceleration of so many trend lines we were already on. What if they never come back? Check. The results speak for themselves. All 7 boxes are checked. Not only is there really a branch COVIDian cult with Anthony Fauci serving as high priest, but this could very well be the largest and most destructive cult in American history. That now brings us to the antidote, or the 7 steps to deconstructing this cult and its influence. Number 1, encourage critical thinking and seek out wisdom in a multitude of counsel. There is so much research counter to Fauciism that out there that is easily accessible, just a morsel of which we have cited in this book. In addition, there are so many experts out there with exemplary resumes or from elite universities you can go to in order to think through this ordeal yourself. True, most of us are not qualified to confront COVID-19 as a health professional would, but we are by virtue of the U.S. Constitution qualified to govern ourselves. The Founding Fathers entrusted this republic in the hands of we the people and not them the experts. For a reason, we do most of the living, dying, and bill paying around here. Therefore, we get the final say. Be informed, yes, but a citizen, not a lemming. And I want to say that there are, like he said, there are a lot of people out there, experts, that are saying different from what Fauci is saying. And I've had Dr. Jeff Barkey on my podcast 3 or 4 times now, and I'm going to continue to bring him on every time this thing, as long as this thing keeps raging out of control. I don't mean the virus, I mean the reaction to it. It's ridiculous. We are here in August 2021, 18 months into it, and we're now again talking about masking up and locking down over a variant, even though deaths and hospitalizations have not risen. Also, another point that I want to make is that the reason that we have elected officials is so that they can look at the entire picture. We don't have experts. We don't have expert bureaucrats. Anthony Fauci does not hold office for a reason, because when we're looking at how to manage something, we don't just hone in on one thing. And when we're looking at how to manage cities, counties, states, the country, we don't focus on just how to prevent a virus or how to control a virus. We look at everything, the entire picture. You know, if we're looking at how it's been handled, we see things like, you know, rises in suicide. We look at abuse in the homes. Wife beatings have increased. People have not gone to the doctor because they were afraid of it. I mean, not to mention all the businesses and jobs that have been lost, houses that have been lost because of the foreclosure moratorium, which is highly unconstitutional. So what you have to do is, instead of saying, well, my entire focus is going to be on how to contain this virus, no. What else are we affecting when we try to contain the virus? We don't just look at that one thing. All right, number 2, take appropriate precautions, including vaccination if need be, but re-engage with the outside world. Turn the TV off, and yes, maybe even disengage from podcasts such as ours at times too. There's a great, big, beautiful creation out there, and some really neat people as well. Commit a subversive act like shake hands with someone and breathe the free air again. Get out of the COVID bubble. Sure, bring the hand sanitizer, and if you're running a temp or have recently been around someone who was stay home. But the vast majority of Americans face more danger from isolation, depression, and financial loss due to COVID than they do to COVID itself. Number 3, rely on established science. The laws of immunology, biology, and virology were there for a reason. In times of fear, grifters appear, like Eric Feigelding. I have no idea who that is. For example, an unpaid visiting nutritionist at Harvard and longtime Democrat Party political operative, he suddenly became a media-quoted expert on coronavirus with a massive social media following by peddling ridiculous panic porn. He's hardly a lone wolf, and grifters like this are legion. Number 4, make the truth first and foremost. Just because Trump did hydroxychloroquine doesn't make it bad, and just because you don't trust Trump doesn't by extension make Fauci holy. There have actually been plenty of times Fauci has said things the science agrees with. It's just that when he does so, it's too often also contradicted something he either previously said or will say later. But the truth is the truth, no matter its source. Nor is something true on the basis of the convenience of accepting it. Results don't determine the truth. The truth determines results. Number 5, reunite with your families again, taking precautions if need be. If you have someone in your family with autoimmune disease, diabetes, or other pre-existing conditions COVID-19 preys upon, you may need to consider continuing with some mitigation efforts. But they were made to be more than a survival rate. Too many of our grandparents have died alone in the past year without a final hug from their babies or grandbabies. And we're guessing almost every one of them would have chosen those final moments of love and affection over a few more weeks and months of oatmeal and seclusion. We were made for relationship, both with our Creator and one another. So go back to church to connect with Him and His people, and get back together to connect with one another. Be whole again. Number 6, cross the COVID fascism boundaries instead. It is past time to defy en masse these Orwellian and mostly unenforceable and ineffective lockdowns. As feminist author Naomi Wolf, hey, remember we previously said the truth is the truth regardless of the source, eloquently said, nowhere in the Constitution does it say all this can be suspended if there is a bad disease. We have lived through typhus, cholera, smallpox, HIV, tuberculosis, polio, the Spanish flu. You know, we've lived through an attack on our soil. Never have there been months and months and months of emergency powers when we weren't actually fighting a war. Amen, sister. Praise the Lord and pass the civil disobedience. Open your businesses, your schools, and your churches. Those all belong to you. This is your country. Those are your communities. These are your children. Assert your God-given autonomy. We are not a nation of laws and never have been. We are a nation of political will and always will be. Therefore, you are in lockdown because you consent to it. The likes of Fauci are never going to give you some magical all clear. So stop consenting to this flat earth voodoo and declare without apology that in this country, the people rule once again. I have to say that I've been, trying to help out with keeping our schools open and our kids unmasked, because we put up with these masks all last year. And I think a lot of us over the summer said, we're done, we're done, we're done. I subbed in the school district last year, and I had to wear a mask for all those last months. And let me tell you, it's ridiculous for 2 reasons. Okay, number 1, we know that kids don't get this like adults do, or even teenagers. They are the least at-risk group. So we're masking them up for what reason? And number 2, at school all day long, the kids are touching their masks, pulling them down, taking them off and on. They are so highly ineffective. It's a joke. So obviously the masks are only being worn in school to make people feel safe. Well, I'm not sacrificing my kid so that you can feel safe. You have to be able to see each other's facial expressions for an adequate education to take place. And you have to be able to breathe freely. So anyway, I went to a community forum for our school board. It was actually the superintendent recently, and there was a very large group of people there who felt just like me and were ready to take this guy down if he mandated masks. Fortunately, he did not. Of course, a few days later, we get an email saying that teachers that are not vaccinated will have to wear them. So it's a constant battle. But I can tell you, a lot of us are done. We are done. We are not going back. We are ready to be done. We put up with it way too long, and we're not going back. All right, number 7, put your trust in your faith, your family, and your freedom. This is the trinity of American exceptionalism. It sustained us through a war for independence, a civil war, 2 world wars, a cold war, an industrial revolution, past pandemics, civil unrest, and for more than 2 centuries. It can sustain us through COVID-19 as well. Sadly, even if we follow all 7 of these steps successfully, we will still have countrymen who refuse to leave the Branch Covidian compound of their own making. So be it. Kick the dust off your sandals and move on with your way of life. If they choose to live their lives in fear, they have unfortunately made their choice, but stop letting them choose for you. All right, and then he goes on to talk about again how we Fauci is not an elected official, how there needs to be a 9/11 style commission, and we need to stop listening to him. So I really recommend. There's a lot of great lines, a lot of great quotes in this book. I recommend you pick it up. I think I only paid $10 or $11 for it on Amazon. It's worth having. So go find it. Faucian Bargain by Steve Deace, and that's Deace, and Todd Erzin on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And this podcast, again, can be found on Amazon Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher. You can even tell Alexa, play Annette on Life, Liberty, Happiness, and she'll do that. And so I thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, where freedom lovers gather.